Well, I'm joined now by David Willey. He's also in Rome. David has reported extensively about Italy. He is a former BBC Vatican correspondent. He is also an author. His book about the late Pope is entitled The Promise of Francis, The Man, the Pope, and the Challenge of Change. David, it's good to have you with us. You write in your book that after he became Pope, Francis's first promise was to transform the image of the Vatican as a place that flaunted its wealth and its riches to a place where the poor and even the homeless would not feel out of place. Did he make good on that promise?
I think he did. It was interesting that his very first trip outside Italy was to the island of Lampedusa, halfway between North Africa and Italy, which had become the refuge for many immigrants who had tried to escape poverty and oppression in their countries of origin. And the Pope was always very mindful of the problems faced by immigrants all over the world. He obviously remembered very clearly that his own family was an immigrant family. His father and mother left Italy, they were of Italian origin, to escape the fascist regime and migrated to Buenos Aires in the 1920s.
David, one doesn't necessarily expect a young man from Argentina who starts out as a nightclub bouncer and then becomes a Jesuit priest to then become a pope committed to reforming the Catholic Church, but that indeed was Francis. Was there one event in his life or one characteristic about him that made this unlikely sequence of events possible?
I think one of the most important facts to remember about Pope Francis is that he was a Jesuit. And the Jesuits have an extremely long professional training. I think he studied for 14 years altogether, various, not only in seminaries and theological studies, but also in the practical tasks of teaching. He was a teacher in a middle school in Argentina, and I think he liked interacting with people. He really couldn't stand the idea of trying to be a lonely figure, as popes have tended to be in the past. When he was elected, immediately after he was elected pope, they took him up to the penthouse apartment at the top of the Apostolic Palace, where his predecessors had all lived. He took one look and said, "I'm not staying here. There's room for 200 people here." He moved back into the guest house, which had been prepared by a previous pope to welcome the cardinals during their stay in Rome. So he was a man who was accustomed to living very simply. When he was archbishop in Buenos Aires, he used to do his own cooking at weekends. He looked after himself, but he liked the idea of dining and having his meals in the cafeteria in the Vatican guest house with other priests and, of course, a lot of lay people as well. He liked people.
The Pope was also known as a reformer Pope. And I'm wondering, what about those who surrounded him? Did he face a lot of backlash for his rather progressive views in his inner circle?
He did indeed. There was a group of people in the Catholic Church, including high-ranking cardinals, who rather were opposed to his attempts to reform the Church, and they wanted to hang on to old traditions like the Latin Mass. There were big arguments. And then there was a problem involving the former Vatican nuncio or ambassador to the United States, an archbishop called Vigano, who issued a long statement basically opposing everything that the Pope stood for. In the end, the Pope decided to sack him. He was defrocked, as they say. Mm-hmm. And but he still is a very vocal opponent to Pope Francis. And there are many in the Catholic Church, particularly in the United States, who opposed the idea of modernizing the church. Mm-hmm. Of course, it wasn't just a question of modernizing the church. I think Pope Francis understood the needs of the modern age, and he understood also how it isn't a question only of laying down dogma about whether priests are allowed to be women or priests allowed to marry. He didn't change that teaching of the church. In fact, he left it to a future pope to consider that. But there are many aspects of Catholic faith which he decided to accept. The fact, for example, that homosexuals have a legitimate place in society. His predecessor, Pope Benedict, had denounced homosexuality as something rather abominable. This Pope admitted that homosexuals have a right to have their lives just like any other people in the world. And though the church may not recognize their union as a proper marriage, they have a right to live together if they want to.
David, very briefly before we run out of time, what about backlash from the public? Did the Pope of the people, as he was known, did he have to face that?
Not really. He was, I think, a pope who was immensely popular, as you can see by the crowds which gathered during his appearances at his weekly audience, and who are now gathering in Rome for his funeral. This is expected to be one of the biggest events in Rome in centuries. There are more than 1 million people will be arriving to attend his funeral during the next few days. Not only heads of state, heads of government, admirers from all over the world, all the countries he's visited during his long many trips abroad, but also ordinary people, ordinary pilgrims who've been touched by his statements and his attention to what he called the periphery of the church. That is, outsiders, people who hitherto perhaps have been considered marginal, liked living on the margins. And I think that's what he'll be remembered for.
David Willey, we appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with us. Thank you.